Barnfinds and deals too good to be true. Alright folks, this is my first moto vlog and I'm doing it on the TRX 250 that I fixed up for the wife. And I'm going to talk about Barnfinds. And a lot of you may think, oh hey, yeah, that's a great way to get a good deal. And working as a motorcycle tech, I have to say, for some people, yes it is. For some people, no it's not. Now the difference is can you work on the bike yourself? Working as a dealer tech right now, I see people bring in bikes that have been sitting 5, 10 plus years. They think they got a great deal on it and they end up spending $300 to $500 if all it needs is a carb clean, and easily $1,000 plus if it's fuel injected and the pump's gone bad. Now one thing you need to add into that is how old are the tires? Because tires on motorcycles should be used at about 4 years old. Once they get older than that, they start getting hard and losing traction and making them unsafe. Now, people might not really think that's a big concern. Oh, I've run tires on my car for 10 plus years and they're fine. Or I've had this bike and it's on the original tires that are 12 years old, and honestly, if you put new tires on there, especially bikes, you'll see a huge difference in how it handles and brakes and everything related to being safe on them. So, you can see from some of my older videos that I have an XS650 that I rebuilt, put fuel injection on, and did everything to. Now this, for me, was a long-term project. It took me 2 years to get it on the road, and then after a couple hundred miles I took it in to get dyno tuned because of the fuel injection, and it ended up having a wrist pin circlip fail. Fast forward a year and I put a big bore kit on it. So now you're looking at another $500 and another year of build time. Now for me, this is okay because I wanted to build an XS650 for a long time, and that was my chance. I picked the bike up for $100. I have around $5,000 in it, but I know how to work on them. So if you're picking up a bike to learn to work on, find something cheap, find something simple. Like the old CB 4-cylinders are not that simple for a new person. Just the carburetors can be a pain. But if you pick up, say, a CB 125, maybe a CB 350, a 2-cylinder, so you only have 2 carburetors to deal with, it's a little bit easier, but it still takes a fair bit of getting used to. And there's some trial and error, especially if you go to pod filters, because CV carbs don't like those. And straight exhaust, so you need a rejet. Now I'm not saying don't buy a Barnfind, don't buy something that's been sitting if you're new to riding. But I do say that if you're expecting it to be a cheap bike and you'll get it on the road for cheap and you'll just take it to a shop and they'll get it going for you, it's probably going to cost more than you expect, and the older it is, the more likely it is the shop's not going to want to touch it unless it's a small independent shop. In Washington, dealers wouldn't touch a bike that was over 20 years old. Like if you wanted a new tire put on your 1995 XR 250, they'd say, bring us the wheel and we'll put the tire on for you, but we will not take the wheel off a bike that old. And that's liability for the shop, partly because on older bikes you don't know what's going to fail next. And offering a warranty on something that you can't guarantee isn't going to be good for a while is a losing proposition. So, if you like old motorcycles and you don't know how to work on them, don't buy that Vincent Velocet because you have money. Don't buy a CB750 thinking, oh, this is going to be cheap and easy, because it's going to be a lot harder than you think. In fact, this Honda Recon, it's a 97. I picked it up cheap because it wasn't running, it had been sitting, it was beat up, and I put a fair amount of time into fixing it up for the wife. So you need to remember just what it costs when you start looking at parts. And one thing you need to look at on any older bike, even mid-2000s, is if it's been sitting, take a look in the gas tank. If the gas tank is rusty, you're looking at either cleaning out the rust and coating it and hoping it works, because a lot of the coatings do fail, or you're looking at trying to find a new tank. And newer bikes, that's an expensive proposition. Older bikes, you're looking on eBay and hoping it's in better shape than what you've already got. So I suggest, if you're new to motorcycles, buying the best bike you can afford. And if you can't find anything but a non-running barn find, I would suggest saving up for a while longer and trying to get something that's not going to be a nightmare to fix. Because honestly, a lot of people try to get into riding and they get a bike that needs some work and they get discouraged because it's at the shop so long, because it's costing so much to fix. So if you're new, it's really better to get a bike that's running and riding and you can start using it. I'm not saying you have to go out and buy brand new, but I am saying that until you learn a little bit more about bikes and you learn more about riding, and you learn how to do some of the repairs yourself, you really should look at something that will be reliable and not need constant tweaking. Because a lot of vintage bikes, you'll forever be readjusting the carburetors, resynchronizing, checking the spark plugs. If it's got points, you're going to want to upgrade to electronic ignition. And don't fall into the trap of, well, the forum says everybody does this upgrade, I must need this upgrade. And honestly, that's not true. The closer to stock you keep it, the more it's going to be worth when you pass it on. There are some truly terrible cafe-style bikes out there. They've been modified, they've got the look, but because of the way they were modified, they are not really safe to ride. And when something is not safe to ride, if you take it to a shop, they'll fix it, they'll make sure it works in the parking lot, but they will not take it on the street, and they'll tell you we're not warranting it because we felt the bike wasn't safe for us to ride, so we don't know how well the repair is going to actually work. So it's not expensive all the time, but if you don't know how to fix a bike yourself, shop costs will add up fast. Because a lot of places, the average rate for a shop is $130 an hour. If you don't have $130 to spend for an hour of labor, then look for a bike that won't need much labor. Oil changes are dirt simple. Learn to do those yourself. The hardest ones to do an oil change on are probably the Yamaha V-Stars. Some of those you have to pull the front header to be able to get the oil filter out and put a new one in. Which makes it kind of a pain to work on yourself. Oh, there's where we pushed my buddy Matt's bike when it broke down. Had to push it down the road to get it to the truck. We didn't want to push it all the way off the trail. So, this is just a caution because we see at least once, twice a week a bike coming in, oh, I bought it for this great deal, it's been sitting, and then they end up spending as much or more than they paid for the bike just to be able to ride it home. Which, if you don't know what you're doing, is not a great deal. And cleaning a carburetor is not as simple as some people make it seem. You get any carb cleaner on any of your rubber parts and they're going to fall apart. So you have to completely strip the carbs down. A lot of times, especially with some of the late 80s, early 90s Hondas where they don't have adjustable float heights, this one would be an example of that. You end up having to replace the float because, well, you put in a new float valve, but it's still leaking fuel out of the carburetor after a little bit. It means the float's out of adjustment, and being non-adjustable, that just means buying a new one. In fact, the shop I work at, if it comes in and it's got non-adjustable float and it's been leaking, we just automatically replace the float now. Because we had too many bikes come back with the carburetor, oh hey, it's still leaking after it sits a while. Not a huge hassle, but it's kind of a pain when you thought you finally got your bike back and it's still doing the same problem you initially took it into the shop for. This ATV will actually be getting a top end here pretty soon because despite the fact of how well it seems to be running, it is burning oil. And that makes it not the greatest bike for taking out on the trails. Can't really see the oil burning behind me, but I know it's doing it. And I want this to be reliable for the wife, so I'm going to put a little bit more work into it. And on that, I'm putting in a Chinese piston and cylinder. Now you have to be careful doing that because some of them are decent quality, and some of them will end up failing quick enough that you'd have been better off spending twice as much on a better brand piston and rings and taking your cylinder somewhere to get bored. And one downside to that is a lot of places aren't boring cylinders anymore, or if you call around, shops will be like, oh yeah, we bore cylinders, but then you go in and they're like, oh, we don't bore anything that small. We only do Harleys. Like in my area, if you need a cylinder bored in Oklahoma City, you're probably going to end up at Wedman Motorsports. But they are a good shop and they charge a fair price. I don't work there, but I have taken cylinders there to get bored. This is a little bit louder than your standard Recon because before I got it, somebody put a full HMF exhaust on it, and I added the baffle and spark arrestor so I could legally bring it out here to the trails. Which, if you're getting into dirt bikes, that's something you need to consider, is Chinese bikes, a lot of them, if you take the stock exhaust off, the aftermarket ones for them are cheap, but they do not have spark arresters, and that makes them to where you can't legally take them on the trail, and depending on where you are, that could mean if you run into a ranger, they'll take your bike and leave you to walk out without a bike. I enjoy riding out here. I have Mondays off due to working at a bike shop, so there's basically nobody else out here. I saw two other trucks when I pulled in, but out here on the green trail, it's just me. And there's only two trails you can really take an ATV on out here, which is the green trail and the grass track. Which, for my wife learning, that's perfectly fine, but once she gets a little more experienced and wants to do a little bit more riding, it will be a downside Because, well, what's fun in going somewhere when you can only really ride the one trail? Then another thing to consider if you're just getting into bikes, you're split off for the grass track, is find the like-minded people. Find people that are interested in the same things you are, that know more than you do, because they can teach you a whole lot, and actually listen to their advice. Because if you don't listen to their advice, they'll eventually just blow you off and be like, well, whatever, they're going to do what they want, no matter what we say. And that is not a good spot to be in, and if they know your bike's hacked up and not well modified, they will warn others they know to avoid that bike because it's unsafe. Yeah, I know I'm not a fast off-road rider. Plus, this is a utility quad, so it's not really meant to go fast. But it's enjoyable, and there are good ways to get into motorcycling or off-roading or riding an ATV. And there's bad ways to get into them. So the big thing is, start with something that's not outside your skill set, because that will make it that much harder, that much more disheartening when a year and a half later it's in pieces in your garage and you're thinking about putting it on Craigslist. And taking a loss because you bought all these parts for it, but you still can't get it running. Which is why I come back to, if you're new and you don't really know how to work on things, either buy a newer bike, start learning how to do your maintenance on it, and enjoy yourself for a while before you decide, oh, well, I'm going to get this project bike. I'm going to get this Barnfinds. It's a model I've always wanted. Because until you know at least the basics, you're going to struggle getting it running, getting it going, and if you have to pay somebody, you're going to be way into it. Probably more than you intend. My XS, if I had taken it to a shop, I'd have been probably looking at an easy $10,000 to $15,000 by the time you added labor to get it to where it's sitting. Because it is so old, there would probably be no warranty. So after I finish the lap on this bike, I'm going to switch over and ride my KTM for a lap. And then I'll be done for the day. Because if you're new to trail riding, this stuff wears you out. And it doesn't take a whole lot to get you tired enough to make bad decisions when you're on the trail. So I'm going to say, have a good day, make good choices on your bike purchases, and know what you're getting into, because a lot of people out there don't.